Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Rival Recon here on Anfield Index Pro. As weeks go, the last 7 days weren't half bad for the Reds, with wins over City, United and Everton doing little to dampen the mood of Liverpool fans across the globe. Though with all the trophies still to play for, the games continue to come thick and fast, with this run-in set to test Klopp's side thoroughly as they embark upon securing what looked like an improbable quadruple. So turning our attention back to the Premier League on today's pod, we'll be looking ahead to Sunday's game against a resurgent Newcastle United, as the Reds head to St James's Park looking to spoil their recent party whilst extending their own. So joining me on the pod to discuss the astounding turnaround from Newcastle since the turn of the year, new cult hero Bruno Guimaraes, and more, I'm delighted to welcome back Newcastle correspondent for The Athletic, Chris Waugh. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you for having me back. Now, how's it going?
Not bad, as we were just talking about ahead of the pod. It'd be a weird position to be in as a football fan if I had anything to complain about at this stage, being a Liverpool fan. And I'm just trying to keep the nerves to a minimum as everything's still on the table at the moment. So it's that stage in a poker game, right, where you're trying not to act like you're breaking it. But it's certainly great, and it's obviously great to catch up with you again. I spoke to you before, sort of heading into Christmas, weren't we? Ahead of the previous game, I think it was on the 16th of December. I wanted to go back to that just first before we sort of delve into some other topics. But what did you make of sort of how Newcastle approached the game that day? And then I think just following it, I'm probably going to talk about after that game and the City defeat straight after it. Just the incredible run that the team have gone on. So we'll probably move on to that afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Liverpool game, I was at Anfield for that, and Newcastle started well for a team who had only won once all season and had particularly struggled on the road. Obviously, they took the lead through Shelby. I thought Saint-Maximin caused some problems early on. Howard decided to rest Callum Wilson. He played Saint-Maximin as a sort of false nine almost, and he was very direct through the middle and got through a few times. But for some poor finishing on his part and Alisson making some good saves, Newcastle could and possibly should have got a bit further ahead. There was obviously then the sort of controversial first goal for the equaliser for Liverpool with Isaac Hayden down with he claimed a head injury at the time, and obviously the referee played on and Liverpool scored. And Hayden was actually playing Jota onside, if I remember correctly as well. So yeah, it was a shame how that sort of went, because once that goal went in, it was sort of inevitable what was going to happen. Newcastle still gave a decent account of themselves, but you just felt that Liverpool were going to go on and win it. But that was one of the more encouraging early performances under how it showed that there was certainly off the ball work that Newcastle could do to try and strengthen the position they're in. And then from that point on, obviously, yes, in the course of that week, they'd lost to Leicester City 4-0 the weekend before. They then played Man City at home the following weekend and lost 4-0. And so in the space of 3 matches, Newcastle conceded 11 goals. And at that stage, you were quite concerned. But since then, the upturn has just been astonishing. And I've written a big piece which is going out in the Athletic tomorrow, sort of looking into the reasons why there's been such a dramatic turnaround. Not that Newcastle are going to survive, but now are in a comfortable position where they're in 9th position with 4 matches to go, which, given that they hadn't won any of their first 14 Premier League games, and no team has ever survived in the Premier League era, haven't done that. They had only won once by January 21st, and yet now they've got 11 victories. They've won the last 6 at home. They've won the last 4 home and away. They've won 10 of the last 14 in the league. They're just in such brilliant form, and the only team who betters them for form in 2022 in general is Liverpool, because Newcastle have accumulated the second highest number of points in the Premier League. It's just been an absolutely staggering turnaround.
Yeah, sounds like it's a great time to speak to you then. Actually, yeah, if you've just come off a sort of a mammoth session writing that piece that's soon to come out around sort of this remarkable turnaround, and you mentioned a little bit there around signs in the Liverpool game of some of that off the ball work was starting to take shape, and of course I thought one of the most striking or really obvious examples is obviously the transformation in how Joe Linton was played early on when Howe came in and sort of tried to convert him into sort of more of a combative midfielder, if that's sort of the right way to sort of talk about sort of the work that he'd been doing. I suppose that's the obvious question then, in terms of you mentioned those stats there around the side's form ahead of this run, but then to go from as you mentioned, conceding 11 goals in those games to on a remarkable run of about 9 games unbeaten in the Premier League. I mean, what are the sort of the main reasons that you put that down to? What are the changes that you've seen Howe trying to implement? Obviously, we'll come on to talk about some of the new recruits and some of the new, I think it's fair to say, cult heroes that are emerging at Newcastle. But yeah, in terms of Howe's involvement and what he's done to turn this around so remarkably, what would you put it down to?
Well, I mean, Joe Linton sort of embodies the improvement in so many players under Eddie Howe that January, as we'll get on to, was very important, and Newcastle flexed their financial muscles, and that played a key role. But equally, that overlooks the work that Howe had done beforehand and has done subsequently with players who, I mean, Joe Linton was let's be honest, almost a laughingstock among the Newcastle fans for a long period. Certainly as a centre forward, it just didn't look like he was working at all in that role. He wasn't really offering anything. And yet Howe, before he came in, liked Joe Linton from afar. He likes a physical player, someone who has those sort of attributes. And actually, it's almost by luck. Well, certainly if Newcastle hadn't gone down to 10 men against Norwich City at the end of November, and at which point Howe asked Joe Linton to move into a number 8 position, then he may never have discovered that Joe Linton was number 8. He brought Joe Linton in the team, and he'd already improved, but basically as a sort of right-sided forward, it was almost coincidental that he moved him in that position, but then found that he was this destroyer of a midfielder. He's big physical presence. He's tactically very aware. Howe's been very impressed with how quickly he's made that adjustment to playing in a different midfield role, and he has really helped Newcastle become more defensively solid across the team, because this is a team who in 2021 conceded 80 Premier League goals across the calendar year. That's a Premier League record for the era. And in 2022 so far, they've conceded 13 in 15 games. They are a team transformed in that sense, and a large part of that is because they're just so solid across the pitch.
Just on Joe Linton, Chris, sorry to jump in there, but I remember last time we spoke, you were talking about a piece, I think, that you'd written, or either one of your colleagues had written as well, about maybe just the level of professionalism that sort of was being seen from Joe Linton, sort of the fact that he'd sort of gone away, sort of reassessed himself a little bit, tried to sort of find marginal gains, improve himself, to be somebody that was valued in this squad, which I found pretty interesting, and it sort of reflects, I suppose, how he's really adapted to the new challenge there. But I was just interested in terms of sort of his adaptation to that role. I mean, how much do you put that down to sort of the work that he's done himself?
Undoubtedly, that has aided all the work that Eddie Howe has done with him. I mean, Joe Linton has these Zoom calls and works with data sort of analysts based in Brazil to really look at his own clips and work on his own game and do additional work outside the training ground. But also Eddie Howe has brought in a heck of a lot of analysis that obviously there's always analysis at Newcastle United, but even more so, Howe has worked individually with so many players, Joe Linton being one of them, but others who weren't even really in the team, Fabian Schär, Ryan Fraser. There's so many players who've improved so much, and they have benefited from that sort of one-on-one coaching, that desire to improve them, to help them be better and go out on the pitch with a plan and idea of what they're trying to do. One of the big criticisms during Steve Bruce's time at Newcastle was that they lacked an identity, and that sometimes players weren't entirely sure what their role was on a match day. Well, Eddie Howe doesn't leave anything like that a chance. Him and his coaching staff make sure that they know exactly what they're going to do. So, yes, Joe Linton's own work has certainly contributed to that, but also Howe and his coaching staff deserve a heck of a lot of credit. And Joe Linton, I think, has helped them in the sense that they didn't need to sign a destructive midfielder in January because they almost had that. They basically discovered one from within, and someone had made them so much more solid. And what's been fascinating about Howe is that from his time at Bournemouth, they conceded 60 goals, and at least in every single Premier League season he'd been there, he was renowned for his sort of attacking football. He was not when the job came up, people were looking at it, myself included, someone from the outside, and thinking, well, if you're looking for someone to come in and shore up Newcastle's defence, which they undoubtedly need to do if they're going to survive, then is Eddie Howe that man? I actually asked Howe about this 10 days ago, and I said, those perceptions that were there at the time that you weren't the right man, what do you make of them? And he said, well, if I was out on the outside looking in, I'd think exactly the same, because if I'd done exactly what I'd done at Bournemouth, then it wouldn't have worked at Newcastle. He used his time out from the games, 15 months out, to really analyse himself, and he still has his principles of attacking front foot football, and he intends to progress to that over time. But he realised that in the short term, there needed to be a pragmatism to the way that he was going to revive Newcastle United this season. They had to stop conceding goals and become difficult to beat. And the turnaround has been astonishing. They've gone from a team that regularly conceded, I think it was 12 occasions by Christmas that Newcastle had conceded at least 2 goals in a Premier League match. Since then, they've done it on one occasion. That was when they lost 5-1 at Spurs. Really, they've had a 45-minute aberration in the second half at Spurs where they've conceded a lot of goals. Otherwise, they are very difficult to play against. They've had 6 clean sheets this year, 4 in the last 6 as well. They're just very, very hard to break down. And the attacking side of the game still needs some improvement, and that will come over time. But they've also done this without the top scorer, Callum Wilson, who's still their top scorer with 6 goals. He's been out since December 27th. And Kieran Trippier came in and obviously had a huge impact and has had a huge impact off the field. But he only actually played 4 matches before he broke his metatarsal. So Newcastle have done this without some of their automatic starters in the team, which has made it even more impressive.
No, it's incredibly impressive. Yeah, and I think it's would certainly have been my perception looking at Eddie Howe when he was appointed that, okay, a promising coach, a detail-oriented coach, certainly very professional in sort of the way in which he conducts himself. But I'd have those same concerns that you raised there around sort of what you knew of that Bournemouth team and how it actually used to be. It used to be really entertaining games, I remember, but often sort of the defensive fragilities or maybe being a little bit too attacking, you wondered how that was going to translate. So the fact that he's been self-aware enough to be pragmatic, as you mentioned. I mean, how is he shaping this Newcastle side then, sort of this new pragmatic Eddie Howe and his Newcastle side that are defensively solid? How are they lining up most weeks?
Most weeks he's gone for a 4-3-3. So he started at Newcastle. His very first game, he inherited a wing-back system, which he discarded after one match, and he moved to a 4-4-1-1, which is a formation he used a lot at Bournemouth. But after the Leicester game, so basically before the match immediately before Newcastle played Liverpool last time, he decided that and recognised that he needed extra bodies in midfield to try and protect Newcastle's back four and to give them more solidity, really. So that's where Joe Linton came in as a midfielder, and so whereas Bruce before him argued that Newcastle couldn't line up with the back four, Howe has tried to address problems a bit higher up the pitch, and so Newcastle try to play a bit higher. They try to press off the ball. There's high intensity off the ball. They don't do it all the time, but they pick the moments and choose to do so. And so his midfield, there was a long period where that was Joe Linton, John Joe Shelvey and Joe Willock. But over the course of the last few weeks, having gradually introduced him into the side, given that he was the only player without Premier League experience who Newcastle signed in January, Bruno Guimaraes has come in and is now absolutely thriving in midfield and is probably the first name on the team sheet. So he fits in there along with Joe Linton, and then it tends to be one of John Joe Shelvey or Joe Willock, and even Sean Longstaff on occasion is the midfield. Chris Wood joined in January. He plays through the middle, usually Alan St-Maximin on the left. Ryan Fraser, who's fit, will probably be on the right, but it's likely to be Miguel Almiron. And then Dan Burn and Fabian Schär. Fabian Schär, who barely played under the previous manager towards the end, are the centre-backs, with Emil Kraft likely to be the right back, given Trippier still out, and then Matt Targett on loan from Aston Villa at left back, and Martin Dubravka in goal. That tends to be his strongest available 11 at the moment.
Nice. Particularly interesting, sort of hearing about the players that have come in from the cold, sort of from the previous manager. When you mentioned sort of Schär there as well, and yeah, I think when it comes to Guimaraes, I think we'll definitely have to be focusing on him a little bit in a little bit. But just looking at the team there and looking at the back four, I mean, even with sort of the increased solidity that's come from sort of the steel that's been added to the midfield, sort of unexpectedly, I guess. I mean, that defensive unit, were you surprised by how well it's taken?
I am to an extent, yeah, because Fabian Schär has been a lot of things at Newcastle, but being defensively solid has not been one of them during his time. Right. He's often had a rick in him, but he's a very good ball playing centre back. But reliability was often a problem, particularly when he wasn't playing in a back three. And Emil Kraft has, over the last few weeks, done very, very well. But again, similar to Joelinton, he was seen as a bit of just not good enough for the Premier League. Really, he was seen as a player who just wasn't competent enough to play regularly, and yet he's really improved under Eddie Howe. He's one of the players who the athleticism and fitness that Eddie Howe has brought into the team, whereas early in the season Newcastle often struggled during the second half of matches and were outrun by teams and sort of the physicality that just wasn't there. Now they are one of the fittest teams in the Premier League, and very rarely do you see Newcastle struggling physically when compared to the opposition. So Dan Burn has come in and done very, very well. He was in very good form for Brighton, but even so, he was basically their third or fourth choice centre-back, and yet has come into Newcastle and looked really at home. There's been a couple of mistakes here and there, but in general, he's just been solid. He doesn't do anything spectacular, but he makes the correct decisions. It's the same with Matt Targett at left-back. Has come in from Villa, and I wrote an article last week where I asked, it was a very unscientific poll, but I asked Newcastle fans if they wanted to keep Matt Targett. 97.5% of fans said they wanted to keep him. So that's how well he has done so far at his time. So yeah, it has impressed me how solid and organised they are. Because in recent weeks, it's not just that they're not conceding goals; they're very rarely conceding that many chances either. Certainly at St James's Park, they're very, very difficult to play against. They're very good at making the opposition struggle to play their own game. That's not something that's necessarily easy to do, and Newcastle aren't always easy on the eye when they play at St James's, but they don't let the opposition have all the attempts that they previously would have done. And for that turnaround from the team that was there in the first half of the season to now, no, I really didn't see that coming, even with the January additions. Yeah, and I think it's
remarkable is the word for sort of the turnaround, given some of the data that you've been mentioning at the start as well, around the form that you found the side in, and sort of the form that Eddie Howe found the side in, certainly. And so you say Dan Burn is the leader there at the back, you'd say, in terms of sort of the figurehead.
I think so, yeah. He's seen as almost being like a future Newcastle captain, potentially, right, okay. Or one of the many leaders. One of the things Howe wanted in January as well, as Premier League experience, was he wanted to bring more leaders into the dressing room. He wanted to and they brought that in Kieran Trippier, in Dan Burn, to an extent Matt Targett in a different sort of way, Chris Wood as well, all experienced, all strong voices in the dressing room, and Dan Burn certainly at the back is just someone, he's just cool and composed, and that's what Newcastle needed. They now don't look like they panic in situations when previously they probably would have done.
And we've spoken, I think, many times around sort of, I think in some of the darker days around when the club felt a little bit as though it was drifting, and at times sort of different cup competitions not even prioritised, and so sort of fans questioning that, of course, in terms of questioning the ownership as well. In terms of the general atmosphere around the club, I'm guessing it's as good as it's been, given this sort of recent upturn in results. And I just wanted to ask, was there a particular moment? Is there a particular match that you look at in this really positive run that you think, well, that's symptomatic actually of what Eddie Howe would want this Newcastle team to be, in terms of how they play on the pitch and how they represent his principles? But then also, is there a game that you sort of look at and go, well, that's probably the best atmosphere I can remember at Newcastle for many, many years?
In terms of the game that typifies where Newcastle are under Howe and the sort of direction they're trying to travel in, I think probably the second half of a 3-1 victory over Everton in February,
Right.
where they really took control of the match. They were very good, created a lot of opportunities, were still defensively solid, but also were pressing high, winning the ball high, creating a lot of opportunities, and were good in possession, because that's not something they've been, even under Howe, for large spells. They've struggled to retain the ball and recycle the ball as well as you would expect of maybe an Eddie Howe side, certainly from his Bournemouth days, and that's been a long-term problem at Newcastle. So I'd say that when they really put on a performance that they needed. Kieran Trippier was in the side. They were very, very strong from set pieces. They created chances in open play. Alan Saint-Maximin played very, very well. I think that is the closest that we've seen in terms of where the direction of travel, at least, that Howe wants to take them in. They've been more about being solid in recent weeks. And in terms of atmosphere, I'd say that one, but also the very end of when Newcastle beat Leicester City 2-1 a couple of weekends ago. Bruno Guimaraes scored 95th minute equaliser. For large parts, actually, the crowd was quite quiet that day, or relative to how it's been, but just the scenes at the end were just extraordinary, and that was carried through into when they beat Crystal Palace 1-0 that midweek as well. Every single home match at St James's now feels like an occasion for Newcastle, whereas previously, certainly under the previous ownership, and to a large extent under the previous manager, matches where you'd have a lot of fans who were sort of turning up because it's what they did on a weekend, and in many ways it was almost like that the 90 minutes of football was the worst part of the day. It was more about the experience of the entire day, whereas now fans are turning up. War flag displays are back, which are the displays in the Gallagher end, but actually have moved to all the way around the ground now as well, and there's just a buzz around the place and excitement. People want to be inside St James's Park again, and Dan Burn is a former season ticket holder at Newcastle, and he speaks about the atmosphere being similar to when he used to go and watch Newcastle in the Champions League under Sir Bobby Robson play Juventus and Milan. And even within the club, you speak to some people, and someone said to me the other day that it does have that similar sort of feeling in terms of everyone being together. Eddie Howe has been keen to build unity, both internally but also throughout the club in general, to have everyone on the same page. And it does feel, for the first time in a long time, that everyone has had the same goals at Newcastle once the takeover happened and once Eddie Howe was there, rather than there being this sort of internal fighting between the owners and fans and the manager. The goal was survival, and everyone has focused on that. There hasn't been division internally, and it as cliched as it might sound, it is a very powerful thing at a club like Newcastle, just as it can be at a club like Liverpool, where the fans are so connected with the football club and they have that sort of symbiotic relationship. That's definitely been the case over the last few months, and every single home match, and I expect the atmosphere to be absolutely electric on Saturday again.
Yeah, I've got no doubts, and there's nothing quite like a last minute goal always does wonders for the atmosphere, but sort of a last minute goal that's a diving header as well is always one that sort of gets people going. And so I think it's probably the best time to sort of move on to talk about Bruno Guimaraes, and just as you mentioned, sort of Eddie Howe being careful with sort of how he integrated him into the side. Obviously, the big money signing, lots of excitement around how he would do, sort of his talent, how would that translate to the Premier League, how would that translate to Newcastle. Just what have you made of him? And for folks who had never heard anything about him in terms of sort of what he's like as a player, could you just sort of sum up what his game's all about?
Well, in January, when Newcastle were trying to complete the deal, I spoke to a couple of scouts who'd watched him extensively, and they described him as a number 6+, and by that what they meant was that he can play the deep lying role in midfield, but can also play as a number 8, and basically has a bit of everything as a midfielder. He's not box to box, but he brings so much to the game. He's very, very good at playing the deep lying role in terms of bringing teammates into play, loves a through ball, very good at switching play quickly. But then he also he's also very good defensively in terms of the amount of defensive actions that he contributes for a player of his technical ability and his vision is rare. So he basically tops all the stats in just about every department. And since he's been at Newcastle, he's risen to the top of those charts in terms of touches, passes, tackles, interceptions, everything. He's just involved in every single sort of way. And Howe was very brave in many ways to ignore the hype around him when he first came in. And Howe obviously really, really likes him and wanted him. But there was so much hype from Newcastle fans, and there was a few occasions at St James's when he was on the bench and Newcastle fans would chant for Bruno's name, and Howe didn't just play to the crowd and put him on when fans wanted him to. He would pick and choose his moments. In the first few matches, he was only getting sort of 5-10 minutes here and there. Gradually built it up, gave him his first start at Southampton. He scored an absolutely outrageous back heel flick and controlled the game. And then he made his first start at St James's against Leicester City, scores twice. One of which he reacts very quickly to put it through Schmeichel's legs when Schmeichel doesn't deal with the ball properly. The second one, that diving header. And then he provides an assist as well, and then also goes and scores a cheeky dink over Tim Krul at Norwich City last weekend. This is a player who had only scored 3 goals for Lyon in 2 years, and he's come to Newcastle and scored 4 already. He's played as number 8 more regularly, but against Norwich he moved back to the number 6 position. He's happy playing either. I think he prefers playing number 8 because he can get sort of up and down the pitch and provide a bit more offensively, but he just looks a class above everyone at Newcastle. The way that he's come in, he's raised levels around him, and you can see he's almost one step ahead of some of his teammates, and he just is such a classy player, technically excellent, someone who grew up playing futsal, and you can see that in his game. If anyone hasn't seen his goal against Norwich, Tim Krul kicks the ball out to the edge of his area. It's a terrible pass, but Bruno Guimaraes manages to get in front of the Norwich defender, and he sort of rolls the ball with his studs on the bottom of his foot, which is a way that he controls the ball quite often. It's unusual that you see that in 11-a-side football, but it's the way he controls it in the box to then perfectly set himself to dink the goalkeeper. He has such technical skill and such vision, and he's also very brave on the ball and willing to put it all in defensively. I realise I'm sounding quite hyperbolic, but actually what he brings has just been huge. Newcastle have not had a player like this in a long, long time, and there is so much excitement about him, and I think it will only grow because he knows he's good, he's brash, he shows that out on the pitch as well, but he also puts in the hard yards and does deliver, and so far what he's delivered in Newcastle shirt has been quite astonishing, to be honest.
Yeah, no, from sort of the time that Coutinho spent at the club, I mean, yeah, any time that you get a footballer at the club that's had a history of playing futsal, you generally see about 3 or 4 things every game that are very, very entertaining, to be honest, even if it's all sort of basic aspects of control and things like that. But if you mentioned that there's not been a player like him at Newcastle for a long time. I mean, if you were to try and draw a comparison to a player in Newcastle's past, who would you say is most like him?
I mean, in terms of the ability to pick a pass, possibly Johan Cabaye, but he's got more to his game than Johan Cabaye did. Johan Cabaye was a very good player for Newcastle. I'd probably say the closest, although he wasn't as technically gifted as Bruno Guimaraes is, but in terms of being a sort of all-round footballer, maybe Rob Lee in the 90s, but I'm not sure there is necessarily someone comparable in terms of same skill set, in terms of what they can bring and in terms of controlling a game. Yeah, probably Rob Lee, but I think that they're still different players. I've not really seen someone like Bruno Guimaraes, because I think he is a unique player, or certainly he's a rare player in terms of all of the different aspects he can bring. That's why there was so many teams looking at him in January. Newcastle sort of leapfrogged quite a few teams because I think a lot were looking to sign him this summer, but Newcastle managed to get him through the door. And if he's a glimpse of the future that Newcastle United have and the kind of player that they're looking at, then the future does look very exciting indeed.
And just moving back to Eddie Howe for a second, you spoke a little bit about some of the things that he's brought to the team, sort of the different tactical approach, the fact that he's been a bit more pragmatic himself in terms of sort of how he typically had lined up his teams in the past. There was a lot riding on this for him, I felt, in terms of sort of he'd been out of the game for a while. I think people were starting to question necessarily his reputation, sort of given how things had ended with Bournemouth, despite the fantastic work that he did there. I'm just interested how you think he's handled everything, given that the fact that he was going to have to handle the on-the-pitch chaos at times in terms of getting the team back united, believing in sort of the project, integrating the new signings, as you mentioned, getting them fitter, but then also having to deal with those questions about the off-pitch concerns around the ownership. That I think it's pretty clear those questions will keep coming, and he's had to field them as well. I mean, how do you think he's done sort of overall in terms of sort of the job that he's had since he joined in November?
I think he's done very, very well. It did take him maybe a couple of months to really find his feet. He was always impressive when he spoke, but it was maybe sort of middle to end of January where you suddenly felt that he felt comfortable in the position, having gone from Bournemouth, who, no disrespect to Bournemouth, are just, it's not you don't have the same pressures that you do at Newcastle United. There's not the same scrutiny, there's not the same interest, and you could see that at first Eddie Howe was still adjusting to how much scrutiny there was and how many questions there would be and to the social media activity, but he has grown into that, and with obviously how impressive his coaching has been and the integration of January signings, but also in January he had to act almost as like a de facto director of football because Newcastle didn't have one in place. So he was very, very active during January, and this is someone who's work obsessed anyway, so basically doesn't have a spare minute as it is, and he'd taken on an additional role to make sure that he got what Newcastle needed to be able to survive, or he felt that they needed to make sure they were going to survive. In terms of the difficult off-field questions, that's something which he could have handled better, and he should have addressed it more at his unveiling. He was also asked about it on other occasions and sort of said, I'll only talk about football, and didn't deal with it particularly well. He opened up a little bit more afterwards and sort of explained why he didn't want to go into it. To a lot of people, those answers still won't be satisfactory, and those questions will still be asked, and rightly so in many ways, although it's very difficult because how and what can he answer for them? He is not the ultimate owners of Newcastle United. Those questions probably need to go higher. And so in that sense, yes, and he will always, no matter what he says in answer to those questions, he's always going to receive criticism. So he's tried to just focus on the football, and if you're looking at the footballing aspect of things, there's very little he can complain about in terms of what he's done and how he's handled himself, because the turnaround has been astonishing, and Newcastle fans rightly are lauding the job that he's done.
And you mentioned as well some of the players that he's been able to not resuscitate their careers, but sort of bring them back into the fold, build up their confidence again. And not that these players necessarily needed it, but I'm looking at sort of the lineup. So a couple of games ago, I'm looking at figures like Shelvey, Miguel Almiron, of course, who arrived for a lot of money, but had struggled to really make the impact in terms of sort of being able to score goals and actually have end product despite sort of his willingness. Certainly, Saint-Maximin had already been a crowd favourite, I think, adored by all Newcastle fans. I mean, those three players, I'm interested sort of how they've integrated into his team, because Shelvey, again, a player who had plenty of ups and downs and sort of questions about his desire, I suppose. And then Almiron, who arrived, in those unique circumstances, as I mentioned, for big money. And Saint-Maximin, who was supposedly at times towards the end of Steve Bruce's reign, the tactics did often look as simple as, well, we just somehow got to work it into situations where we can get the ball to Saint-Maximin because he is everything for us. How is he dealing with not necessarily having all that pressure on him anymore? Sorry, I know there's a bunch of questions in it.
I mean, if we tackle Shelvey first, Shelvey was someone who, when Eddie Howe first came in, a lot of Newcastle fans, I think, thought that Shelvey would be moved on. But Howe made a point in his first press conference, and Howe doesn't really go off message. And if he does, he has a reason for doing it, and he's thought about it. And he mentioned Shelvey of his own accord and said how important Shelvey was going to be as a player because he wanted to address it quite early on. And he has brought something out of John Joe Shelvey that for large parts of his time at Newcastle hasn't really been seen. He's made Shelvey fitter. He's made him defensively very strong. He's been impressive defensively. He's always obviously had the technical ability and the ball playing ability to get Newcastle higher up the pitch, to create those, to play those through balls. But what he's bringing in an all-round capacity hadn't been seen in Newcastle shirt before, and Shelvey himself talks about his sort of reinvention under Howe and how much he's enjoying working under someone who is looking at the individual aspects of what he brings. So Shelvey's had a real renaissance and is now adored. But he was always valued by Newcastle fans, but there was always that other side to it, is seen as being lazy because of his body language. But actually now out on the pitch, you can't question what he brings in terms of commitment and work ethic. Miguel Almiron's had a bit more of an up and down time. He's been in and out of the side. He probably wouldn't be in the strongest 11, or at least wouldn't be when Ryan Fraser was playing well. He scored a very good goal against Crystal Palace. It was his first goal in 34 games, I think, 34 league matches. So he is still brings a heck of a lot off the ball, but there's question marks about his future in terms of what he can bring offensively. How really likes what he can bring in terms of his work ethic and his desire. But Almiron's probably one of the players who actually has suffered in terms of game time, if not the fact that when he does play, he does look like he brings more than he did previously. He's just not quite been in the starting 11 as much. Saint-Maximin, again, is an interesting one because in-house, off-the-ball structure, everyone has a role and everyone has to commit to being part of that structure. The only one who's made exceptions for is Alan Saint-Maximin, who does try and do his off-the-ball work, but it's not something he's natural at. So Chris Wood, as the centre-forward, quite often covers the left-hand side, and actually having Joel Linton and Matt Targett as the left side as well basically covers for the defensive deficiencies of Alan Saint-Maximin and allows Alan Saint-Maximin to have that freedom to go forward. There have been some very good performances in there, like the second half against Everton. Either side of Christmas, he contributed a lot against Man United as well. But his form has been up and down, and that's been because of injuries and fitness concerns. And a few fans have now started to question what is his role in the team because of his off-the-ball work, but Howe recognises that Newcastle going forward are still limited. They still need Saint-Maximin's ingenuity, his ability to carry the ball, his ability to create space for others. And so he's a very important member of the team, but he hasn't necessarily flourished under Howe in the same way that some of the other players have. He was always very important to Newcastle and remains so, but maybe not quite as singularly important as he was previously under Steve Bruce.
And I know Hal's sort of been at pains to talk about the fact that there's not going to be some sort of crazy summer window sort of revolution, I think was the phrase that he used in terms of bringing world-class players from around the world in all in one window or anything like that. But in terms of the areas of the team where you think will be the obvious targets for the summer for him to address, where are those?
Strikers definitely is the priority. Newcastle's top scorer has been out since December, and he has a patchy injury record as it is. Chris Wood, although Howe has praised him and has even described him as having been fantastic, he's only brought 2 goals, and they really do need a greater source of goals. They could do with more from midfield as well. They tried to sign Jesse Lingard in January. I do think they'll look for another offensive midfielder, a wide forward as well, and then also another centre-back. I think they're going to be the key areas really for them. That they are looking to bring in sort of 3, 4, 5 maybe who will hopefully come in and improve the first team, not just squad players as they maybe did previously. They're looking for quality now, and it's not, they need to get rid of a lot of players because when all their senior players return from loan, they already have 3 on the books at St James's who aren't out on loan, who aren't in the 25-man squad. I think it goes up to about 34 players with those who are out on loan, so they need to do a lot of moving out. But in terms of incomings, I think 3 or 4, but striker definitely the priority.
No, certainly. I think it's in terms of the type of striker as well. Is there a particular mould that you think that will be targeted?
I think they're looking for a sort of all-round type striker in terms of someone who could maybe play anywhere across the front line, but brings a few of the different aspects of that you would see in a sort of modern striker. Someone who can run the channels, can hold it up a little bit, but isn't really a sort of target man. Brings goals, not necessarily someone who's going to score 30 goals a season, although that would be wonderful, but someone who can bring other players into play and can be that sort of central focal point up front, as well as being adaptable going forward. So that they've looked at certain players. They really like Darwin Núñez, but obviously so many other clubs do, and he's basically intimated that he wants to go to a Champions League club. They made at least tentative overtures in January, and we're hoping they might get him in the summer, but I just can't see that happening. So who they do end up signing will be fascinating to see, because so many clubs are looking at strikers this summer, and how far Newcastle's budget stretches and how much of a pull they can be compared to the sides they're going to try and challenge for certain players is as of yet unknown, and will be fascinating to see.
No, certainly will. And then just one final question before we wrap things up. I mean, the Newcastle side that you've described there, and sort of this rigid, sort of defensively solid side that can really sort of reduce the number of chances the team can can have against them. It sounds like Liverpool are going to have had an interesting 3 games by the time this weekend's sort of finished, because we've had Everton doing their best sort of Atletico impersonation in the derby, but without sort of the attacking threat to go with it, or any possession really. And then there was, or tonight rather, there's Villarreal, who I imagine are going to be an even more organised version of that with some punch as well. And then it sounds like on the weekend we could well have a similar sort of showing from Newcastle in terms of how they approach the game. Is that how do you expect how to approach a game against Liverpool at home with that great atmosphere like you mentioned, and the side playing so well?
Yeah, I mean, I watched Everton and I was impressed with them defensively in many ways, but I think Newcastle will offer a tougher test than that, because Newcastle are used to playing with in terms of without the ball, and are used to being defensively rigid. That's not to say Newcastle won't create opportunities, because they will try and press high on occasion and win the ball off Liverpool. They will want to impose themselves on the match, and Howe will be targeting it as a win. He won't go into it. He obviously isn't going to be gung-ho, but he's not going to go into the match just thinking we could just contain Liverpool. There will still be a plan as that we can contain to try and win the game as long as the odds may be on that. I mean, the one question about Newcastle is, now they've moved on to 43 points, their objective for the season basically is already done. Will that lead to a sort of 1 or 2% drop-off psychologically? And will that then mean that Liverpool can take advantage of that? We didn't see it at Norwich, although until Newcastle scored and then Norwich basically fell apart as a team, you could just see we're going to go down. Newcastle weren't really dominant. They weren't quite at the levels they were before. They stepped it up once they scored. But I think that given that it's Liverpool coming to St James's, given what's at stake for Liverpool and the size of the occasion, given the crowd behind them, Newcastle have only lost once at St James's under Eddie Howe. They've won their last 6 there. It will be a very difficult occasion, I think, for Liverpool. I wouldn't be fancying it if I was Liverpool going up to St James's on Saturday, particularly having had to battle away through the Everton game and then against what will likely be a battle against Villarreal tonight. Newcastle will certainly give them a test. It will be interesting to see how far this Newcastle side has come, how they are able to take sides on, because they went to Chelsea a few weeks ago, and for the first time in a long while at a sort of top 4 club, Newcastle gave them a really, really good game and were very unlucky to lose that one. Decisions went against them. I think that they will believe that they can cause an upset at Liverpool this weekend. I certainly think that they'll fancy their chances of getting at least a point. And so if I was Liverpool and I'm looking at the last few Premier League fixtures, this is the one I think I'd be a bit concerned about.
I'm hoping that those focuses really go into the game on the 8th of May. Personally, I have to admit, so obviously that's where my focus lies. Yeah, no, I think I was talking about the schedule right at the start of the pod, and if Liverpool are going to win things, they're going to have to do it, the hard way with the schedule in terms of going through some really, really tough, well organised teams. I think actually in this run in. Is there, just before we do wrap up everything up, is there one area where you look at, I mean, obviously this Liverpool team is performing very well, but is there a particular player or anything like that you look at and go, well, actually that's a particular area of the pitch that you think is going to be the most important for Newcastle to sort of try and neutralise?
I think Newcastle need to get control of the game in the field. That's where they've stifled the opposition in recent months. And if they can stop, say if Thiago plays, they can stop Thiago managing to get those round the corner balls through. If they can stop the service early to the front line and just basically stop Liverpool playing the way that Liverpool want to play, then that will be crucial. So yeah, Newcastle's midfield has to function. That's where all of their strength really comes from. And if they can do that, then they have the platform, certainly from set pieces. Newcastle's set piece record under Eddie Howe is very good at scoring from set pieces. So they will have opportunities to try and disrupt Liverpool in those departments. So yeah, just get the midfield right. And if they do that, then Liverpool are in for a very tough game. Yeah,
no, I would expect Thiago to play that game. Actually, I think that he'll probably be rotated out tonight along with Keita, who both played the derby and then the United game. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see those two line up at St James's Park. Great to see Thiago playing at St James's Park. Actually, he's experienced some interesting atmospheres over the past few weeks, so that's going to be a fun one for him as well. But anyway, Chris, as always, thank you for all the great insight into Newcastle. And it's actually just I mean, I'm sure it's a breath of fresh air for you, but it's just much more enjoyable to be talking about sort of these sorts of issues and sort of how the side's progressing than some of the conversations we've had to have over the past few times that we've spoken as well. So yeah, thank you as always for coming on.
No, pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And just to wrap things up here, guys, so all of you have been listening to Rival Recon here on Anfield Index Pro, as you would have heard me and Chris talk about the run-in. Games coming thick and fast now towards the end of the season, and it's going to be made tough if we are going to be winning the trophies that are luckily still on the table. So do stay with us, and of course I'll be back again after the Newcastle game, focusing on Liverpool's another tough test. Let's face it, up against Tottenham Hotspur on the 7th of May. So join us then for another episode of Rival Recon.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index, and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.